Most people think the petrodollar dies in one dramatic scene. It usually doesn't. Systems like this do not collapse with a gong. They erode. That is the first thing I want you to understand. Because if you miss it, you will either panic too early or sleep too long. The old oil dollar order was never just a story about pricing oil in dollars. It was a machine. Oil sold in dollars created constant global demand for dollars. Oil exporters accumulated those dollars. A meaningful share of those dollars found their way back into American assets, American debt, American weapons, and American influence. The arrangement was not some neat formal 50-year contract with an expiry date, the way the internet loves to frame it. It was a long-running strategic bargain built in the 1970s, reinforced by habit, power, and convenience, and that habit became one of America's greatest privileges. If the world needs your currency to buy the most important commodity on earth, then your deficits feel lighter, your debt feels easier to finance, and your financial markets become the natural home for other people. Surpluses, that was the cheat code. Now the cheat code is not gone, but it is less untouchable than it was. That is where the real story begins. The first crack is not theoretical anymore. The United Arab Emirates really did walk out of OPEC at the end of April 2026, effective May 1. That matters because the UAE is not some decorative member. It is one of the strongest producers in the group, and it left because it wanted more freedom to produce than the cartel structure allowed. That is not a conspiracy story. That is a discipline story. When one of the strongest members decides the old quota arrangement is a bad bargain, you are not looking at normal continuity. You are looking at a system whose internal incentives are fraying. That matters more than people realize, because the petrodollar order never relied only on the dollar. It relied on coordination. Coordination among producers. Coordination between Gulf states and Washington. Coordination between oil sales and reserve recycling. Once coordination weakens, optionality rises, and once optionality rises, dollar exclusivity becomes a preference instead of a commandment. That is the second crack. Oil settlement at the edges is becoming more flexible. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough to matter. India made its first crude payment to the UAE in rupees back in 2023. A lot of people treated that like a curiosity. It was not a curiosity, it was proof. Proof that oil trade can happen outside the dollar without the sky falling in. One transaction does not destroy a system, but one exception makes the next exception easier. Once a monopoly becomes negotiable, every participant starts thinking a little differently about what is possible. That is how financial orders loosen. Not with revolution, with exceptions that stop feeling exceptional. And then you get to the third crack, the one I care about most, reserves. If you really want to know what serious people think about the durability of a monetary order, do not listen to television, watch central banks, watch reserve managers, watch the people whose job is not to sound bold, but to survive shocks. Those people have been telling you something for several years now, and most investors still refuse to hear it. They are buying gold. Not because they became doomsday preppers, because they became more honest about concentration risk. The dollar is still dominant in official reserves, but dominance and invincibility are not the same thing. A reserve share can remain number one while still drifting lower. That is exactly what has been happening. And while that drift continues, central banks have been buying gold at a pace modern markets were not trained to expect, more than 1,000 tons a year since 2022. That is not decorative demand, that is institutional repositioning. Now ask yourself the adult question, why gold? Why not simply move from one paper currency to another? Because in a world that is getting more fragmented, paper comes with politics attached. Gold does not need trust in another country's deficits. Gold does not depend on somebody else's payment rails. Gold does not require a sanctions committee. Gold just sits there. That is exactly why it becomes more valuable when confidence in the old system becomes a little less automatic. This is where the source material you gave me was strongest. Not in the theatrical tone, in the structure. The three real forces here are dollarization, debasement, and diversification. De-dollarization does not mean the dollar disappears. It means more trade and more reserves. Begin moving outside the old default channel. Debasement does not mean hyperinflation tomorrow. It means a debt. Heavy system has every reason to let the real value of money carry some of the burden that explicit pain would otherwise have to carry. Diversification means exactly what any serious steward of capital should already know. If too much of your wealth depends on one issuer, one legal regime, one military umbrella, and one reserve system behaving forever, the way it behaved before. Your concentration risk is probably higher than you think. Gold fits all three. That is why gold has been acting the way it has. Not because civilization ended, because institutions are repricing fragility. Now I want to be careful because this is where silly people get carried away. The dollar is not going to zero. The U.S. still has the deepest capital markets in the world. It still has the largest equity market. It still has legal depth, military reach, and financial infrastructure that no rival fully matches. So I am not telling you the throne is gone. I am telling you the throne is less unquestioned. And that is enough. You do not need instant collapse for portfolio logic to change. If the petrodollar moves from monopoly to mere dominance, that still means something: slightly less automatic demand for dollars, slightly less automatic recycling into treasuries, slightly more room for gold in reserves, slightly more reason for reserve managers to hedge political concentration, slightly more pressure on the old assumption that every shock will be absorbed the same way it was absorbed before. That is enough to matter, not in one quarter, over years. And that is exactly how serious money thinks, not in headlines, in long drifts. So how should a regular investor think about this? Not by trying to predict the exact death certificate of the dollar. That is a waste of time. Think instead in layers. First, understand what gold is and is not. Gold is not a productive asset like a great business. It does not invent. It does not compound earnings. It does not pay dividends. But that is not its job. Its job is different. Gold is monetary insurance. Gold is what serious institutions buy when they want something that is outside the liabilities of other actors. That does not make it magical. It makes it useful. Second, understand the difference between gold and gold miners. Physical gold or a plain gold ETF is a direct monetary hedge. A miner is a business with management, cost inflation, country risk, labor risk, geology risk, execution risk, and equity market risk. That means miners can outperform gold dramatically in the right setup, but they can also disappoint you in ways gold itself never would. Third, understand that this is not only about gold. A weakening petrodollar system should also change how you think about dollar concentration more broadly. It should make you more sensitive to reserve behavior. It should make you more aware of the relationship between chronic deficits and real purchasing power. It should make you less lazy about treating the post-1970s order as something that simply renews itself forever. That is the real gain, not one trade, a better frame. And the better frame is this: the petrodollar is not dead, but the age of its absolute comfort is starting to crack. The UAE leaving OPEC matters because cartel discipline matters, local currency oil payments matter because exceptions matter, central bank gold buying matters because reserve behavior matters. A gradually lower dollar reserve share matters because drift matters. And if you ignore all of that just because none of it looks dramatic enough yet, then you are doing what average investors always do in monetary transitions. You are waiting for a movie scene when the real change is already happening in the plumbing. I would rather watch the plumbing. That is where the system tells the truth first. And right now the plumbing is telling you something very clear. The dollar is still the king, but kings can lose powers long before they lose the crown. Gold, being gold, seems to understand that perfectly.